And I gave myself 90% odds of shooting Smokey if he was alive during season. I was that confident I was going to get him. Trump, on the other hand, I gave myself a 10% chance. He didn't live on my farm. He didn't move in daylight. I didn't have a good spot to hunt him. He was very unpredictable. He covered a wide area. At one point, I got 2 pictures of him 17 hours apart, and he was 3 miles apart in 17 hours. I did 2 podcasts on both those podcasts, and I told both guys that my odds of killing Trump, I was taking it down from 10% to 1%.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 227. Don Higgins. 7 days, 400 inches, a buck named Smokey, a buck named Trump. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Black Ash Outdoor Products. Reduce your risk of tree stand suspension trauma with a Tree Stand Wingman, the Tree Stand Emergency Descender System. The Enforcer. Take control of your odor footprint with your personal ozone generator. The Rack Packer. Don't drag your deer out of the woods like a caveman. Never drag a deer again. No need to kill yourself dragging a deer when there's the Rack Packer. Use the promo code BIGBUCK, BIGBUCK, at checkout to earn free shipping at $23 value. Go to therackpacker.com. Covert Scouting Cameras. Remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. The Horny Buck Seed Company. It's all about the freshest seed. Morse's Sporting Goods. A full line of sporting goods without the sales tax. Northwoods Common Sense. New England's finest whitetail deer lures, 100% fresh, pure, and undiluted. And Big Buck merch for only $19.99. You can get a cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirt and show support for this podcast by visiting www.bigbuckregistry.com/MERCH. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
This is Cuz Strickland with Mossy Oak, and you're about to listen to the podcast that I listen to 16 and a half hours nonstop. The Big Buck Registry is the best out there.
Hey y'all, this is Heather Shepard with Tubi Outdoors and the Dixie Deer Classic. You are about to tune in to my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry.
Hey, this is Matt Ross from QDMA, and you're listening to one of my favorite podcasts on the internet, the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to this week's show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we have an ample supply of harnesses to give away from our volunteer donors. If you're in need of a full-body harness, please send an email to j@bigbuckregistry.com. On a frosty November morning in 1979, a 9-point buck walked into Don Higgins' set. Don squeezed the trigger on his grandfather's Remington 12-gauge. The slug found its mark. A decade later, Don acquired his grandparents' small farm, and he wasted no time transforming it into a whitetail paradise. After honing his craft, Don became a conservation contractor and transformed lots of the Midwest into whitetail habitat for the U.S. government and private individuals. Don has written numerous outdoor publications, wrote a book in 2005 called Hunting Trophy Whitetails in the Real World, and now speaks to deer hunters at a variety of deer hunting seminars. One week in October 2017, Don shot 2 bucks of a lifetime, totaling over 400 inches of antler. What you don't realize is that it took 10 years collectively waiting, watching, and planning to make that happen. Don shares with us how he did it. We'll turn to our interview with Don Higgins in just one moment, but before we do, let's turn to Jim Keller with the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. In our first story this week, Indiana deer hunter fatally shot in tree stand. This story is from the IndyStar.com website. Indiana conservation officers are investigating after a man was found shot to death during a weekend deer hunting incident in Harrison County. According to the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, Thomas Zimmerman, 58, of Borden, was hunting on private property in southern Harrison County near Elizabeth Sunday evening. Around 6:40 p.m., a member of Zimmerman's hunting group found him unresponsive. Investigators said he was in an elevated ladder-type tree stand. Officers had to use a rope and pulley system to lower Zimmerman to the ground. Zimmerman died from a close-range gunshot wound to the head, investigators said, and no foul play is suspected. Toxicology and other test results are pending, DNR officials said. Other agencies assisting in the investigation include the Harrison County Sheriff's Department, Harrison County EMS, Harrison County Coroner, and Boone Township Volunteer Fire Department. Analysis confirms chronic wasting disease in Michigan. This story is from the Click on Detroit website. Michigan officials say a deer killed by a hunter in Montcalm County's Sidney Township had chronic wasting disease. The diagnosis of the buck's condition was confirmed by the National Veterinary Services Laboratory in Ames, Iowa. The State Department of Natural Resources says this is the 11th case of chronic wasting disease found among free-ranging deer in Michigan. 3 other suspected cases are under review. With firearm season underway, the DNR is encouraging hunters to have their deer tested. Such checks are mandatory in 3 high-risk areas. To determine if a particular hunting location is within one of the areas, visit www.michigan.gov/CWD. Deer hunter dies after falling from tree stand in Cayuga County. This story is from the Syracuse.com website and is reported by James T. Mulder. A deer hunter died Saturday afternoon in Cayuga County, New York, after falling about 18 feet from a tree stand. The incident happened Saturday afternoon in a wooded area off Center Road in Scipio, according to Detective Lieutenant Brian Schneck of Cayuga County Sheriff's Department. The hunter was identified as Gail Lytle, 54, of Port Byron. Schneck said that his office is awaiting results of an autopsy by the Onondaga County Medical Examiner's Office. The State Department of Environmental Conservation offered these safety tips to hunters who use tree stands. Always use a full body safety harness. Stay connected to the tree from when you leave the ground until you return. If you do not know what a lineman's belt, tether, or lifeline are and how to use them, do not hunt from an elevated stand. Inspect all parts of your stand before use. Use a haul line to raise and lower your unloaded firearm. Before going hunting, let someone know where you will be and when you will return. Hunter falls asleep with gun in his lap, shoots self when cell phone goes off. This story is from the MLive.com website and was reported by Cole Waterman. Note to hunters, if you are at risk for falling asleep, be sure your finger isn't resting on your firearm's trigger. A 32-year-old Bay City, Michigan man learned this tip the hard way. Between 8:30 a.m. and 9 a.m. on Saturday, November 18th, the man was in a deer blind in Ogama County's Edwards Township. He ended up dozing off with his .45 caliber handgun resting in his lap, said Sheriff Howie Hanf. A short while later, the man's cell phone alarm went off, shocking him awake and leading him to compress the gun's trigger. The fired bullet entered one of the man's thighs and struck his femur. The man called a friend of his who came to his rescue and escorted him to a road where an ambulance subsequently picked him up, the sheriff said. The man was taken to a hospital for treatment of a non-life-threatening wound. Hanf said the man won't face criminal charges related to the reckless discharge. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller with the Deer News. Without further ado, here is Don Higgins. Don Higgins, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
We're psyched to talk to you. I mean, who kills 400 inches of whitetail in 1 week? You do.
Yeah. And believe me, nobody's more shocked about it than I was. So it's not like I was expecting it.
Phenomenal accomplishment. I think there are many people that would someday dream of doing that. So we're going to live vicariously through you tonight and during this conversation, if that's all right. We'll figure out how you go about your tactics and strategies and see if we can replicate it somehow down in our own worlds.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Cool, man. Don, tell us about yourself. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in a small town in east central Illinois. My grandparents lived on a small farm about 3 miles outside of town, and I spent a lot of time there, and that's where I fell in love with the outdoors. And as a kid, I was just crazy about the outdoors, and I hunted and fished and trapped for everything there was a season for. And then when I was 16 years old, whitetail deer were not plentiful in my area when I was a kid. They was just starting to get established.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, it was very rare to even see deer tracks out in a field or something like that. And I went hunting for deer the first time when I was 14 years old and did not even see a deer that year. And when I was 16, I shot my first buck. And when I walked up on that buck, it was like my whole world changed. And I was 16 years old. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I'd given up all other outdoor pursuits.
Really? Like what?
Yeah.
Like what did you give up?
Well, I was a big small game hunter and trapper and fisherman.
Yeah.
Last time I went fishing, I've got my youngest daughter's 26 and she was about 2 years old, and I took her fishing and she was afraid of the fish and never wanted to go again. So I never went again. So that was the end of my fishing career. I'd never been turkey hunting a day in my life. I mean, everything I would do, I'd get wrapped up in deer hunting or deer scouting. I'd be small game hunting, but I'd really be scouting for deer. And it didn't matter if I was squirrel hunting in late summer or I was pheasant hunting in the fall. I would just get sidetracked, and it was all about deer for me. And eventually, I gave up the gun as well. And I just probably from about the time I was in my mid 20s, I've not hunted with a gun since for deer. Just strictly a bow hunter. But I'd always set goals, and as far as the size of bucks I wanted to shoot, and I would never compromise those goals. So there was a lot of years I didn't kill a deer, and it started. I would shoot any deer that come along, and then I wanted to shoot bucks only, and then I wanted to shoot a buck with at least 8 points, and then when I realized there was a scoring system, I wanted to shoot a buck that was at least 125, the Pope and Young minimum, and over the years. I'm 54 years old today, so there's been a few decades there.
Sure.
And over the years, I just slowly raised the bar, and I wouldn't compromise. It'd be the last day of season, and there'd be a buck 10 inches below my goal, and I'd let him walk. And I think that was a big key to just learning more about deer and becoming a better deer hunter.
Gotcha.
So
you gave up other hunting adventures because of deer hunting, and was it an intentional decision, or was it something that just kind of naturally came about where you found yourself thinking about deer hunting more than anything else?
That's exactly right. Like I said, it didn't matter what I was doing. Even if I went fishing, I was walking up and down the banks of the river or the lake or whatever, looking for deer sign. And, the best way that I can really describe it is I heard Michael Jordan's father one day in an interview years ago saying that he believes God put some people on earth to do one thing and do it very well. And he believed God put Michael Jordan on earth to play basketball and nothing else. And I almost feel like, God put me on earth to hunt deer and nothing else. I know it sounds crazy, but it's just so passionate, or I'm so passionate about it that, when my eyes open in the morning, it doesn't matter if it's November or July. My eyes open in the morning, I'm thinking about deer. And when I go to bed, it doesn't matter if it's, November or July, I'm thinking about deer. Always scheming for that next big buck, and that's really become the thrill for me, is finding and figuring out individual bucks. For the last 13 years, I've hunted individual bucks. I don't just go out and set a goal of, say, 150 inches, and I'm looking for a buck over 150, and the first one comes along, I'm shooting him. I'm looking for the biggest, oldest buck I can find in the areas I hunt, and I target one specific deer.
All right, I want to explore that in a little bit more and explore it more. So you gave up the gun too.
Yep.
What was that about? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, where I grew up and was hunting at that time, gun season was totally different than bow season. Bow season, you had to rely on your own skills and effort to be successful. And gun season just became a free-for-all where, everybody was going everywhere. They was putting on deer drives. They didn't care if you was in your stand. If they had permission, they was driving the property right underneath your stand. And any deer that were killed during gun season, from my perspective anyway, were killed based on luck. And I wasn't looking to be a lucky hunter. I was looking to be the best hunter I could be and sharpen my skills. And just the gun season became less and less appealing every year as time went by. And bow hunting became more and more so. It was more of a one-on-one challenge, just me and the deer, not me and some deer that was kicked up a half a mile away by another hunter and ran in and I shot him with a gun.
Right. Do you ever have moments where you say, boy, I sure wish I had my gun today?
Never.
Ever? Okay.
No. Even when I first gave up the gun, that never happened.
Okay.
I just, the kill is definitely important. It's why we're out there. And I've heard people say this, or I heard it when I was younger and really never understood it. But the older I get, the more I understand it. That, for me, just laying eyes on a mature buck, a buck that every bow hunter or every deer hunter in the area would gladly shoot, and you can lay eyes on him and have him within bow range of your stand and let him walk, that's a pretty good feeling. And I don't get to experience it all that often because it doesn't matter who you are or where you hunt. Big bucks are going to be tough. Even places like Iowa that are, known for their world-class deer, they're not behind every tree, and it takes a lot of effort to get them, within bow range of your stand, especially on a consistent basis.
Right. Gotcha. You had mentioned that you'll let a particular size buck walk if it's 10 inches or less, which kind of raises a question. How do you go about ground scoring while you're in the moment? I mean, you have to, it sounds like you're going after a particular buck anyway, so you kind of know if it's him or not. But
right.
At the same time,
yeah, right.
If a decent buck walks by you were not aware of, which I would imagine doesn't happen all that often, right? I mean, you're kind of aware of what's in the area.
Yeah, trail cameras just changed the game. I mean, they're the biggest game changers that I've seen in the 40 plus years that I've been deer hunting.
Yeah. And
I've got my share of them. I'd hate to guess how many I've got, somewhere around 25 or 30. And, the bucks I shoot are not bucks that I'm just learning about this year. They're bucks that I've watched for anywhere from, say, 2 to 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
And so I'm not really that concerned about score.
Right.
I'm wanting a mature buck. Currently, I'm targeting bucks that are 6 years old and older. And I also want them to have big racks, don't get me wrong, but they also got to have that age as much as anything. So it's just a process of continually raising the bar. And most deer hunters are not even going to comprehend what I'm saying because, not to say that they're a weekend warrior, and I'm certainly not saying that I'm better than anyone because it's just my passion. If, any other deer hunter on earth would take me fishing, they'd outfish me 100 to 1. So,
right.
Or small game hunting or varmint hunting or elk hunting or whatever it is that they do besides deer hunt, I'm sure they would blow me away at it because that's just not my interest, never has been.
Right. Okay. So you're going after the biggest, oldest deer in a particular area. How do you monitor that? Sounds like the game camera is the mechanism by which you are familiarizing yourself with the bucks in those areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, more than anything, it's the trail cameras. And, I guess the one blessing about my age is that I grew up before the trail camera. And I learned to deer hunt before the trail camera, before food plots were the big rage.
Gotcha.
I learned to hunt back in the day. And then when those things came along, I was already a fairly accomplished hunter. And I added them to my game rather than dependent on them as the primary, tool of my trade.
Yep.
It's kind of like a carpenter that grew up using a handsaw, and all of a sudden he's got a power saw.
Right.
He's got some skills there that the guy that grew up with the power saw is never going to have.
Right. That makes sense. So the effort that you put in, and let's just talk about game cameras and the protocol there. There's a lot of effort that goes into monitoring 25 to 30 cameras all the time. How do you even decide where to put them? How often to check them? How do you check them? Do you have a way in which you go to check them so that, I don't know, maybe you're not interrupting the pattern of the deer? What types of things are you thinking about when you're just checking game cameras and running cameras?
Well, and I usually put my cameras out about July 1st when the bucks are in velvet. And usually by July 1st, they've got enough growth that you can tell individual bucks that you're looking for. But, also any new bucks that might have showed up or whatever. So I put them out in July primarily on food sources. Soybean fields are big here in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And what I've found over the years is the bachelor groups in the summer will hit the same fields year after year after year. So if I know that, I've got particular places where I know there's going to be a bachelor group there next summer because there just is every year. And I've kind of fine-tuned the camera locations just as a hunter would his tree stand locations. Then in the fall, right after or about the time bucks are shedding velvet, I shift those cameras to more traditional rutting areas. Use some mock scrapes with scent to get photos that way.
Okay.
But as far as checking them, I try to do that in the middle of the day.
Okay.
I do not place my cameras for the most part close to where I'm going to be hunting. I don't want to be like having right in front of my stand and I'm stomping in there just to check a camera and putting pressure on my stand. I like to go out right before rain, so it washes my scent away.
Okay. All right. So you're watching weather patterns to decide when to go check cameras.
A lot of times, but when you got that many, it's not like you can go out and check 25 in the morning because it's going to rain that afternoon.
I was going to say that's an all day project.
Yeah. So, I'm checking from July through, say, till hunting season opens, every few days I'll check a few cameras. And, but I've got them scattered over 5 counties too. So,
right.
Some of them are close to home and some of them I got to drive, 50 miles to check. And actually right now I've got some scattered in 2 states. I went to Iowa here scouting about a month ago and left some cameras behind in Iowa. So, the cameras are just, they're the ticket for getting on individual deer.
Gotcha. So what's your SD card protocol? Do you take one with you and swap them out? Or are you checking them while you're standing there? Or are you get in, get out quickly kind of guy?
Yeah, I get in and get out quickly. I just switch the card, check the battery, and if battery life is good, and I just switch the card and get out.
Okay. How do you monitor the cameras that are 50 miles away?
They normally just don't get checked as often.
Okay.
It's kind of funny. The ones closer to home, they get checked quite a bit more than the ones just a few, even 20 miles away. But
gotcha.
I try to check them all every 30 days anyway. But I think from what I've seen, it's easy to burn a spot out, even where you're just like you would burn a tree stand out. You can burn a spot out with your camera as well. By checking it too often, leaving human scent disturbing the deer at that spot too often. So,
sure.
I try to wait about 2 weeks on average between checks, and on some of the ones farther away, it might be more like 30 days or more.
Interesting. All right. So there's sometimes you're spreading it out, in and out quick, less pressure, less footprint, less right. Involvement.
Uh-huh.
Interesting. So what do you do when you get that picture that you've been looking for? Then what?
Well, I keep a database of my pictures from past years, and it's by location. Software that makes it very easy to log your pictures by location where you got them. So, usually what happens is, I put those cameras out the 1st of July, and then towards the end of July, I'm checking them for the first time, and bingo, there's a buck I'm looking for. So I'll go back through, if he's big enough and old enough that I'm going to target him that year, and I've probably already done this before, but I'll go back and I'll check previous year's pictures to kind of confirm his age. And I'm also going to look at other camera locations that are close to that location to see if he was on any of those to get a better handle on his range. So that software that keeps track of those photos by location is pretty important.
Okay. I can see how that would come in handy if you've got a lot of pictures, monitoring a lot of property, monitoring a lot of cameras. Mm-hmm. Letting a computer do the work is pretty handy.
Yeah, that software is just fantastic for it. You can add new locations, unlimited numbers, and I've got pictures. I've been using that software since 2010, and I can go back clear to 2010. And I can see every photo I've saved from a location. Now, I don't save all that many, probably, less than 1% of the photos I get, I'm saving. But I've got locations now where I've got several hundred pictures saved from a particular location. And a lot of the bucks are long since gone, but when one shows up, I can go back and look from the year before. And for example, the buck Trump that I shot this year.
Yep.
I had pictures of him since 2012, so I had 5 summers of pictures of that buck. And then in 2016, he exploded, and I thought it was a new buck. And I was like, man, here's a giant. Where'd he come from? Well, then I go back and I start scanning really paying attention to the pictures from the year before. And well, there he is. He just added a bunch of stuff, but there's no doubt in the shape of his rack and certain tines, it's definitely him. So then I go back to the year before that, and by doing it 1 year at a time, it's a whole lot easier to make that connection. And by doing that, I realized that even though that buck was not on my radar until 2016, when I got those pictures in 2016, I went clear back to 2012, where I had him as a 2-year-old. And that's kind of how I aged that buck, and how I age a lot of bucks is just by going backwards from them trail camera pictures. When they get to the point where they interest me, I just start going backwards. And I don't believe you can age a mature buck by a photo.
Okay.
I see that on the website or on social media a lot.
Right.
Age this. I think you can tell a yearling for sure, and most people can tell a 2-year-old. But after that, I've just seen way too many bucks that I had a pretty good idea of their age, but to look at them, it would be hard to say that.
What's the difference between the bucks that look good and the ones that don't? They're in the same areas, they're feeding on the same thing, they're genetically predisposed to the same genetics. What the issue there between one great buck and one that's not so good?
Well, it's all genetics.
Okay.
It's just like, people. There's going to be some people that are, 6'6", and others that are never going to get above 5'6", and they can live in the same region, eat the same diet and everything else. It's all genetic.
Gotcha. So
I actually had a herd of captive research deer for about 25 years, and I just got rid of the last ones this fall, back in September. But through that experience, I've got to watch probably somewhere around 500 different racks being grown over the years.
Wow. Okay.
And I've watched bucks grow up, and that experience alone has pretty much proven to me that you cannot age a buck by pictures.
Gotcha. All right. That's good to know. That's something that I don't think we talk about a lot, but important, very important.
So are you saying that it has nothing to do with the nutritional input of the deer, or?
Well, in an area, where we're comparing one buck on a particular farm to another buck on a particular farm, why is one 4-year-old 180 inches and the other 4-year-old's 130 inches? If they've got the same diet, the difference is genetics. But you're absolutely right. A deer does need nutrition as well as age to grow those giant racks.
Right, I got you. Say they're on the same diet and the same farm, and what if one is an eater and the other one's not? Is that a possibility, or you think it's still genetics?
To be honest, I've never given that much thought. I suppose that's a possibility. I don't know. I really don't have a good answer for that one.
Yeah, just curious when you say it's all genetics. I just wondered how you come up with that.
Well, and mainly from my experience with the captive research herd. I artificially bred deer for 11 straight years. Most of the research I did was on nutrition and genetics. And, you could there was like certain traits that would genetically go down the line from one generation to the next real easily, while others were not so heritable.
Gotcha.
And just watching those different bucks grow up, like I said, 500, not 500 different bucks, but like 500 bucks, 500 different racks. One buck I might have for 5 years, so I got to watch 5 racks on him. But it's that experience that pretty much proved that genetics is the limiting factor on the true giants.
Gotcha. Okay.
The reason that one buck might eat more than another would probably be body size more than anything, and that's genetic as well. What I really learned as much as anything in the 25 years I had that research herd was how individual bucks are. They're about as individual as people are. And the the biggest difference in people really is genetics.
Right, for sure. Yeah, completely.
Don, how do you go about finding the properties that you hunt and getting permission to hunt those properties?
Well, that's a never-ending process, and it's I mean, just today, for example, I was making phone calls in Iowa to get permission, but I'm always looking for an angle. I'm talking every single day of my life. I'm looking for an angle for a new hunting property. And, it may be that, I had a tree nursery for a number of years where I was dealing with the public selling shade and landscape trees. We would even plant them at businesses and people's yards and such. So, anytime I'm in contact with people, there might be an opportunity for the door to open to a new hunting property. I'm trying to bust that door open every time I see it. So friends of friends is an example.
Okay. All right. I was going to ask, how does that begin? Does it start with a friend, a family member?
Yeah, it can, or I can just be scouting from my truck, driving back roads and see a property I think looks good. I get out the plat book, or anymore, they've got the app on X Hunt.
Sure.
I'll get that out, see who owns it, knock on doors. And I'll tell you, it used to be that I could knock on 10 doors and I'd get permission to hunt on 8 of them, but those days are long over. Now I'll knock on 50 doors and get permission to hunt 1 or 2.
Gotcha. Why do you think that is? Is it just hunting has become more popular?
I think so, and especially deer hunting. Deer hunting is different than small. When I was a kid, and I talked about earlier, small game hunting was a big thing, and deer hunting wasn't quite what it is today, and it wasn't even as popular as small game hunting. Well, if you've got a guy, if you're a farmer and somebody comes by and they want to go pheasant or rabbit hunting or whatever, and you let them go, and 2 days later somebody else comes along and you let them go, it's no big deal. Well, with deer hunting, it is a big deal, because if, say, you got a family member that's deer hunting, you don't want somebody else to come when they're not there and spook the deer off the farm. So deer hunters are kind of notorious for being protective of their hunting areas.
Sure. And
rightly so. I am as much as anyone. And it's just kind of the nature of the game. And as such, it kind of closes when one hunter has a property locked up, it closes the door there for everyone else and pushes them elsewhere. So, hunting access is tough to get. And when people get it, they protect it any way they possibly can.
What for guys around the country that are listening to the show, and gals that may not have access to your part of the world, what is the protocol for getting permission? Obviously, you have to ask, right? But what's in it after that? Do you have to do a written permission kind of thing? And how does it lock out other people, or does it not lock out other people?
Well, here in Illinois, where I'm at, the properties I have permission for is basically word of mouth. I knock on the door and I try to establish a relationship with that landowner. I want him to know that I want to hunt his property next year and the year after and the year after. And once I get my foot in the door, then, I'm doing things like, I mentioned the tree nursery I had where I was selling trees to landowners. If I show up at a guy's house to plant trees in his yard, and, he lives in a situation where it looks like he's got hunting right there on his property, I'm looking around for deer sign, big grubs, whatever, and I get my foot in my door and, bring up the subject, and he gives me permission to hunt, and I offer to maybe knock off some on his bill or give him a tree for free or whatever for hunting permission.
Okay.
And then once I get it, is the most important thing is once you get it is not to lose it. I try to build a relationship by sending everyone that lets me hunt a Christmas card with a gift certificate to some local restaurant or anything like that. Any opportunity I have to help that person in any way possible, I do.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Good strategy there for sure. Mm-hmm. The properties that you're hunting, are they farms generally?
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay.
There's a few that are just, like small wooded tracts, but it's mainly farms with a lot of tillable ground on them.
All right. And the tillable ground is being planted with the soybean, corn type scenarios?
Right. Yep.
All right. So you don't have to establish any kind of food plot. They're already there. It's by farmer consent.
Right. Most of these farms, every tillable acre is being farmed, for income.
Yeah. And
there's just really no place left for a food plot.
Okay. So in these areas where abundant food, huge nutrition, how do you identify the rutting areas? It sounds like you've like isolated certain spots within these areas that are you dedicated to certain rutting behavior. How do you decide where that is? What does that look like to you?
Well, it's thick cover. During the rut, I like to hunt doe bedding areas. What I found is that where the does are, the bucks will be. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times those bucks don't show up until the rut. So I'll have my stands in place long before season. A lot of times I'll hang them in the winter months right after the season for the following season. I like to be on the downwind edge of those thick doe bedding areas and stay out of them until the bucks show up. And, in early November, when it's time for the bucks to start coming around, that's when I start hunting them.
All right. So you're hunting, you'll find the doe bedding areas and you go downwind of that. And
right.
So, so as to let the bucks come in. And if you're downwind of the bedding area, do you find that the bucks are also downwind of the bedding area doing their scent checks, or do you try to get beyond that in between? So they're doing J-hooks and looping around, but you're not right in the middle of that mess.
Yeah, absolutely. The bucks like to cruise those downwind edges and scenting for does and danger both.
Right.
And I like to be right on that edge where the bucks are going to travel through. I get high enough that the buck can actually be downwind of my tree, and a lot of times my scent will blow over his back if he's close enough and the wind's strong enough.
Okay.
But, they use their nose like we use our eyes, and I just try to take advantage of that and always be mindful of that when I'm setting my stands.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about equipment and gear for a little bit. And this is one of Dusty's favorite segments. And
yeah,
when you're talking about stands, how high up are you getting, and what type of stands are you generally using?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was younger, I thought anybody that used a ladder stand was a sissy. And if you wasn't at least 25 feet in the air, you was a wimp. So,
right.
But I'll tell you what, the older I get, I've found myself having more and more ladder stands and even enclosed blinds. And sometimes I'm not very high.
Right. Okay.
I get as high as I need to be hidden the cover. And ideally, if I could have a 15-foot ladder stand in a tree with a lot of cover around it, that would be just ideal for me. But sometimes I got to get higher. I'd say about only probably, I don't know, maybe 25% of my stands are ladder stands, and the other 3/4 are hang-on stands.
Okay. All right.
Don, you carry a backpack with you when you go to the woods?
Yeah, I do. I carry a video camera in there, and my safety strap, and just assorted odds and ends of gear that I may need. And a lot of times I feel like I've carried some of that stuff for a decade and never used it, so I wonder why I still do. But I've got my skin and knife and things like that in there.
Any particular backpack?
I just, to be honest, I've got a cheapo I think it came from Bass Pro Shops about 7 or 8 years ago.
Gotcha. That works for sure. What kind of boots are you wearing in a cold climate?
The current ones I think are, I always wear rubber boots. I've got a lighter set that are, I can't think of the brand. My heavier ones are Irish Setters, with like 1,200 grams of thin slate insulation.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I think Lacrosse are my lighter, warmer weather, rubber boots.
Very good. Any particular camouflage that you prefer over the rest?
No, I'm not loyal to any camo brand. I think it all works. You could even go out in blue jeans and a plaid shirt and shoot deer. So it's just one of them things that, I do wear camo, but it's an odd and end assortment of this and that.
Right on. Let's, if you would, run us through let's say we got a 30-degree November day, you're headed out to bow hunt. How do you dress for that?
I start with some heavy long underwear. And I just put on my jeans and flannel shirt over that. And then I've got, for my outerwear, I've got Cabela's. They got a whitetail series, heavy outer garment. I got a set of bibs and a parka. And that's usually enough to keep me warm on a day like that for several hours.
Gotcha. We get into some of your bow equipment. If we can go into that, tell us what kind of bow you're shooting.
I'm shooting a Matthews Z9 at the moment. I don't know how many years I've had this bow, probably 6, 7 maybe. I think it's the best bow I ever shot, and that's why I've never gotten rid of it, and I just continue year after year to use it. I shot instinctive for years, and I like the little extra length with the Z9 versus the Z7 that Matthews used to have. And I've done so well with it, I've never missed an animal. So I just continue to shoot it and probably will until I do miss. So
Right on. A particular arrow you like to shoot?
Oh, I'm currently using the Full Metal Jacket by Easton.
Gotcha. What kind of broadhead are you tipping the Full Metal Jacket with?
Right now I'm using Slick Tricks, the biggest, heaviest one they got. I just started using them last season after using G5 Montex for since they came out. Actually, I was the first year G5 was in business. They put out the Montec. I really liked the design and started using them, and did until a couple of years ago when I switched to the Slick Trick.
Gotcha. We talked a little bit about tree stands earlier. Is there any particular tree stand that's your favorite? Ladder, hang on, climber? What's your favorite tree stand?
I don't know that I have a favorite. I've got just about everything being made. Lone Wolf's got a good one. Millennium's a good one. They're all probably pretty good in the right situation. But I really don't have a favorite. The older I get, the more I like ladder stands. But there's just a lot of situations where it's tough to get a ladder stand hid, in the right tree. So I'll use a hang on.
Do you use any kind of cover scent spray or shampoos or laundry detergents? Do you use any of that product?
Nope. I play the winds, and that's about it. I went through it all in years past. I used the scent elimination clothing, the sprays, you name it, I did it. And what I found was I had my best success when I played the wind.
Gotcha. Very good. Man, that about covers our lineup of your gear and your tactics on cold weather and your tree stands. Mm-hmm. Jay, you said something about 400 inches of buck earlier. Let's get into that.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that. Quick question before we get into the 400 inches.
Okay.
How often do you practice, Don, your archery skills? I mean, if you're not missing an animal, there's got to be some kind of background to that. You can't just wing it. So what do you do to prepare?
Well, the first thing I do is I shoot. I don't take long shots. A 30-yard shot for me is a long one. I always set up my stands for a 20-yard shot, and I don't put so much pressure on myself to succeed that I take shots outside my comfort zone. And if I can get them within 30 yards, I can pretty much always hit them.
Okay.
I won't say I never miss, because I have missed. But if you're shooting at a relaxed animal at 20 yards, you got to be able to hit them pretty regular.
Right. Yeah. No. That's should be a good comfortable shot, even 30. For me, outside of 30, it gets a little wonky. But I feel very confident inside of 30. I see where you're coming from. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's get into the stories of some of these bucks that you've shot. In particular, this year, right? Is this both of these bucks that we're talking about were both killed this year?
Yep, back in October.
My goodness. Okay. So we've got 400 inches to cover here. Let's, two bucks, one named Smokey, right? And one named Trump. Another named Trump. The buck named Trump. Fantastic. Let's talk about Smokey first. Let's go way back. When did you first start to discover Smokey's potential?
It would have been in 2014. Smokey, I own a small property, a small farm in Illinois myself, 120 acres. And I've done a lot on this farm to improve the habitat. And you got some small food plots on it and such. And Smokey first showed up here in 2013. Or I first took notice of him in 2013 as a 2-year-old. Just a nice 2-year-old 9-point buck. But the next year in 2014 is when he really caught my eye, because he made a huge jump in antler score from a 2-year-old to a 3-year-old. He probably added close to 50 inches from one year to the next. He remains to this day the best 3-year-old I've ever seen in the wild.
Really? Okay.
He was pushing 170 inches at 3 years old.
Interesting.
Yep.
That's a lot. That's a lot for a 3-year-old.
Well, like I said, he's the biggest 3-year-old I've ever seen. And if I would have not had history with him, I would have probably guessed him as a 4-year-old. But in fact, that summer, when he made the big jump, when I first got his trail camera pictures that summer, I did not realize it was the same buck that it was the year before.
Right.
I thought it was a new buck. And then I just happened to get a picture at the same location and the same camera angle as the year before. When I put them two pictures together, it's like, that's the same deer. He's just grown 50 inches.
I'm looking at the picture of Smokey at 3.5 years old right now.
Uh-huh.
And of course, where I live, that's a state record right there at 3.5 years old. And we're talking 7-year-old bucks compared to the New Hampshire bucks. But this buck, looking at it, by antler size, you'd say 7-year-old, most likely, I guess. But the body, the shape of the body, the size of the body, the belly, the head, all say young buck.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that you pick up on this. So there are other, and I don't know, do you agree with that? You can tell, you said earlier you can't tell an age by a picture. Certainly, I don't think you can always tell an age by an antler. But
right.
Do you look at the rest of the deer too? Or you just go by sequential year-over-year pictures?
Oh, yeah. Smokey, for example, he had a little tuft of mane on the back of his neck.
I see that, yeah.
Even when he shed his antlers, I could tell him by that little mane he had on the back of his neck.
Yep.
So I'm looking at other things like that. I've got another buck on my farm right now that the white around his eyes is a lot bigger and more pronounced than the average buck would have. So
okay.
I can tell that buck, just by seeing his face.
Right.
But I do believe you can judge or know the age of a younger buck, a yearling and 2-year-old, pretty easy by a picture.
Right.
It's once they get older than that it becomes tough.
It's difficult, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it is interesting how deer, the tuft of the hair, the white eye pattern, those things are like fingerprints in a sense.
Right.
Yep. Very cool. So you got pictures of Smokey way back. He was impressive along the way. When did you decide to transition out of watch mode and into kill mode?
Well, back in 2004, I shot a buck that scored 214 inches. And there was a little controversy after I shot that deer. He was confiscated by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for a period of time, and I had to hire an attorney and go to court and fight and get my buck back, even though I did nothing wrong. At that time, I made a vow I'm going to shoot another 200-incher, but the next time I'm going to do it on video because, anybody that knew me back then knew that I didn't do anything wrong. But, you hear about some guy that you don't really know and he had his deer confiscated, you kind of automatically assume that he did something wrong. And, I wanted to put all doubters to rest, so I was going to do it again on video. Well, it took me 13 years to get it done, but I finally did this season. So, watching Smokey grow up, he put that giant jump and antler score between 2 and 3. And I thought, man, if that buck's just got one more jump like that, he's going to be over 200. And that's what I've been ultimately looking for. So, I let him go to 4 and he put on a few inches, but not that much, probably, less than 5, I would guess. And then last year he would have been a 5.5-year-old and he put on, probably, I'm going to guess 10 to 15 inches from the year before. So that put him in the 180s pretty solidly. And I actually have his shed antlers, so I know it was in the 180s. But when he showed up as a 185-year-old, then I knew. I mean, we're just one good jump and antler score away from being 200 inches.
Yep. And
he had been pretty much a 5x4 mainframe, and that 5x4 would go from side to side. So the year that he was a 180, he did not have a G4 on one side, and the other side had a real short one, like about 1.5 inches long. And I thought, man, if he would just put a good G4 on each side the same year, he'd gain 10 inches right there if he did nothing else. And that's exactly what he did last summer.
Gotcha. All right. So that triggered the monitoring of the pictures and the effort that you put into seeing this particular buck grow. Then you decided it's time to strategize the kill.
Exactly. I mean, whenever I got the first trail camera pictures last year, and I seen them good G4s on both sides, and he'd added tine length on most of his other tines. I knew he was right there at 200 and probably a little over. And at that, immediately I knew I was going to shoot him if I got the opportunity.
Okay.
And since he was on my home farm, where I spend probably more time hunting here than any other individual farm, I pretty much knew exactly where I had my best chance to shoot him at.
All right, so you finally get the picture that you've been looking for. You're like, he's ready. You've been watching him for years. What's the blueprint? How do you even decide where to hunt, how to hunt? Does it just go back to the basics? What and you've got a whole emotion thing going on here, I would imagine.
Yeah, it basically went back to past history with Smokey and trail camera pictures. I don't know if you've seen my blog post where I talk about him. It's just the last one I posted earlier this week. That I had trail camera pictures of Smokey each year as a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old.
Yep.
And a lot of those trail camera pictures came from the very same location, and a lot of them were in daylight. And that was a spot where I also got some great video footage of him on multiple seasons from the stand. So I knew that was kind of the hub or the core of his area, and I figured that'd be the best spot to kill him, which it ultimately was.
Gotcha. So strategize the hunt. What's your plan for you? Got the picture in September 2017, and August 2017. What's your plan? You're like, I have to hunt my farm. That's it. And the place, the general location. But then what? What goes into what stand should I hunt? When should I hunt? How do you?
Well, I had where I actually ended up shooting was from an elevated blind, and it's in an ideal, unique situation where about 5 different types of cover come together. There's an open farm field. There's a evergreen spruce thicket. There's a hardwood thicket. There's a field of tall bedding grasses. And then there's a food plot, and they all kind of corner up right there at this one spot, like the center of a piece of pie almost. Mm. And right there, I've got a blind, and the farm field was harvested. So I come in across that harvested farm field to that blind with my scent blowing right out back into that open field where I wouldn't expect him to be or any other deer to be.
Yeah.
And it's just an ideal situation where I've shot other mature bucks in the past, and seeing him there in the past and seeing those trail cameras just told me that was the spot. So the food plot, I wanted to make sure it was a food plot that would be good from opening day clear through the season in case it took me a while to get him shot. So Real World has a food plot blend called Deadly Dozen. There's 12 different seeds in there, 12 different plant species, and some of them are palatable early in the season, some mid-season, some later in the season. So that's what I went with in that plot to kind of as an added lure to bring him past that blind.
Okay. All right. So you're planning some things in addition. So this was your farm. You have control of what's being planted, not somebody else's. Mm-hmm. So you get to choose what's going in and out. Gotcha. Right. And because the spot had the history of other mature bucks, would you say that history repeats itself with deer hunting, where a good spot is generally a good spot for a very long time until something changes?
Absolutely. Okay. No doubt about it. I've got multiple locations where I've shot multiple bucks years apart even. As long as that area doesn't become some major change doesn't happen with the terrain or the cover, or it doesn't get burned out by overhunting with the wrong wind direction or something like that.
Gotcha. All right. So it's a reliable spot is good as long as you don't mess it up, basically.
Right. Yep.
Gotcha.
And I needed a northwest wind to hunt this particular spot. And the thing about it is the first 10 days of season, we had southerly winds. So even though this buck was here that I wanted to shoot really bad, I did not even hunt for him till October 11th, because that was the first day we had a wind that would allow me to get into the stand to hunt him.
So October 11th comes. You have the right wind. You've decided it's the right wind to hunt this spot.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about the wind in that spot that made you decide it was the right wind?
Well, I needed it to be blowing out away from any of the cover, from the spruce thicket or the hardwood thicket or the tall bedding grass field.
Okay.
I needed, and even the food plot. I needed it to be blowing out where I least expected a deer to be.
Okay. All right. So you wanted to make sure that the wind was not blowing or it was blowing away from where deer probably aren't. You wanted to, instead of blowing into where deer probably are, the exact opposite, the wind you didn't want. Okay. So you're identified a good wind. Take us through that day. Was October 11th the first day you hunted him?
It was.
Okay.
And I'd been waiting for this wind. I had a cameraman lined up. He knew what wind we needed. So the day or two before, the forecast was calling for a front to come through and the wind to change. And so we'd been in contact. And that day, he showed up. We went into the blind about an hour earlier than I normally would, just to be sure. Mm-hmm. We actually did see Smokey that day. He came out of that tall grass field, and I've got a fire break planted in clover around the edge of it so that I can burn those grasses. And he came out of it about 80 yards or so from our location, and he started feeding in that clover, and he could go one or two directions. He'd come straight towards us or straight away from us. And unfortunately, that evening, he chose to go straight away from us. And we got some pretty good footage, but just no shot.
Okay. All right. So that's October 11th. Then
right.
What? Then what?
Well, we didn't have a northwest wind again until the 15th. So the 15th, we went back and repeat. The only difference was on the 15th, Smokey came out right in front of the blind from the tall grass field into the Deadly Dozen food plot. Okay. And he came out into the, fed a little bit and worked his way along the edge of that plot. As he was quartering towards us, just getting a little bit closer as he came along, and he got broadside at 25 yards, and I sent an arrow through his heart.
Gotcha. Just like that. So you've kind of been planning this day for years, and this particular spot was your favorite particular spot, and you waited until you got the right wind, hunted one day, had your opportunity, didn't happen, hunted 4 days later, and the opportunity presented itself, and you put a arrow right on point. Mm-hmm. Between the 11th and the 15th, did you go in there at all, or did you stay out completely?
No, I totally stayed out.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. What a great story. I mean, that's a long time. And what was it like when you finally was able to put down old Smokey? What was the emotion?
Well, I'll tell you, it was honestly, I've shot more than my share of good bucks, but this one was totally different because I had literally spent 13 years trying to make that one moment happen, and to actually have it happen. When he stepped out of that tall grass into the food plot, I was breathing harder, and my heart was pounding harder than it has in a long, long time. And
right, because
I knew, 13 years of work and effort, and dreaming and scheming was coming down to that moment. The moment was at hand, and I got a little nervous for a second. Luckily, I calmed down before I took the shot and made good on it. But as he ran off, he ran right down the clover fire break where he'd come out the evening on the 11th, and he got out there about 60 or 80 yards, and he stopped. And as he stopped, he was facing away from us, kind of quartering away where I could kind of see down one side, and you could just see the blood pouring out of him. It was literally pouring out of him.
Okay.
And he stood there for just a few seconds, maybe 5 seconds, with that blood pouring out of him. And all of a sudden his rear quarter started to give way, and he started to rock over. And then he just kind of took a tumble off to the side back into those tall grasses. And I knew he was down right there.
Yep.
It was just, I don't know, it's hard to describe.
It is hard to describe a moment like that.
Yeah.
Wow. Crazy. Excellent. Long time developing type of story. That's very cool. Let's talk about a buck named Trump. Where do we begin that story?
Well, Trump is the absolute polar opposite of Smokey. Smokey is a buck. Last summer I wrote magazine articles and did podcasts and talked about both these bucks before I shot them. And I gave myself 90% odds of shooting Smokey if he was alive during season.
Okay.
I was that confident I was going to get him. Trump, on the other hand, I gave myself a 10% chance.
Really?
And then
why?
He didn't live on my farm. He didn't move in daylight. I didn't have a good spot to hunt him. He was very unpredictable.
Okay.
He covered a wide area. At one point, I got 2 pictures of him 17 hours apart, and he was 3 miles apart in 17 hours.
Okay.
So
I'm surprised
he was just
you
a
made
totally
it 10%.
different animal.
10% was pretty high in my book.
Well, 10% was high. And then on Tuesday, when I shot Smokey, it was on a Sunday evening. On Tuesday, I did 2 podcasts. On both those podcasts, both guys asked me about the buck that I was still after Trump. And I told both guys that my odds of killing Trump, I was taking it down from 10% to 1%.
Wow.
And then my next hunt on Thursday, I shot him. So I was as surprised as anyone.
That's cool. And what was the progression? Was it did you have a sequential pictures to go through year after year, or was this something random?
No, he had. I'd been getting his picture every summer since 2012.
Okay.
When he was a 2-year-old. But the thing was, he would leave that area when about the time he shed velvet. What I found out here in the farm country, the Midwest, is about half of the bucks will summer someplace different than they spend their fall, and they shift their range a little bit. And he was one of those that shifted his range, because I would leave the cameras out there where I'd get his pictures in the summer, but after about the first week of October, I'd never get another picture of him for the rest of the season. And then, next year I'd put my cameras out in July, and there he'd be again. But around the 1st of October, he disappeared. So the bad thing is whenever he exploded in 2016, put on several inches of antler, I had no idea where he was going because I wasn't getting him on any of my other cameras. So I had to start gaining access to new properties and new directions, just kind of surrounding where I was getting his summer picture. In an effort to locate where he was going. And I slowly got, pictures from 8 different locations last fall during hunting season, and kind of gave me a little bit of insight into where he was going. But it was just, everything was so random. You'd get his picture on a camera, and that may be the only time you got his picture there, or maybe a month later he'd show up, or 3 weeks later he'd show up, and it was always at night. It was never daylight. So he was just a totally different. He was as real world as it gets, too, because he wasn't in a heavily managed area. I doubt if he ever ate in a food plot. Every place that I could hunt him, other hunters were on the same properties. So that's why I gave myself about a 1% chance of killing him.
Gotcha. Was Trump the same age as Smokey?
Trump was actually a year older. He was 7.5.
7.5. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Wow. So you had to figure out new properties. You had to get permission to were you trying to hunt those properties or just monitor those properties?
Well, it started out monitoring. I didn't want to go to the trouble of hanging stands until I knew Trump spent some time there. So I was getting permission, and I was going in and hanging several trail cameras to see if he even used those properties. And there was actually plenty of them where I got permission to put cameras up that I never did get his picture there. So
okay.
It was about a 50-50 deal. About half of them I would and half of them I wouldn't.
Okay. And were these adjacent properties you thought he might be traveling to?
Well, yeah, where he was spending his summer at, I had the next cover to the north and to the west. I had permission to hunt. I had cameras out, and I never got his picture in all those years in those two directions. So I was pretty sure he was going either south or east from his summer range. And so I just, started branching out to the south and the east, setting cameras, and sure enough, I would get him, and then I would move a little farther in that direction, just trying to put the pieces together and see how far he was going. And the more I learned, the more I realized how little I knew.
Okay. So more and more camera studies, monitoring, not hunting, just monitoring, trying to figure out where he was traveling based off of hunches, kind of like Xing out spots where you knew that he wasn't traveling because you weren't getting pictures. And then
right. And Trump is the only buck that I ever created a spreadsheet for trying to figure him out. Usually I would just refer back to the Reconic software and the database of photos there. But with Trump, I knew so little, and his habits were so random that what I was doing was on my spreadsheet. I'd have the date of the picture, the time of the picture, the location of the picture, but then I was looking for every other detail I could put down, like which direction he came from when I got his picture and which direction he left, after a picture or series of pictures.
Right.
Any other bucks that were with him when I got his picture and things like that. Just any detail I could pick out of those pictures, I was putting on that spreadsheet, trying to come up with some sort of a pattern that I could maybe take advantage of later. But
right.
The thing of it was, I never really learned a thing doing it. He was just so random.
No, you identify that there was no pattern.
Right.
Gotcha. So let's go to the day of the kill, or what led up to that?
Well, I was hunting Trump from opening day. All those first 10 days of the season that I described earlier when I talked about the hunt for Smokey, where the wind was out of the south, I hunted for Trump almost every one of those days. The the day I shot him, which would have been the 19th, was the first time. It was the 10th day I hunted for him. Out of, let's see, only 2 different tree stands. So I hunted 10 times, and that was the 10th time when I shot him. He was the first deer that I seen on those 10 hunts. I never seen a single deer the first 9 hunts. And it got to be where it was almost a joke with my hunting partner, good friend of mine, Kevin Boyer. I would text back and forth from my stand, and I'd say on my 6th hunt for Trump, still haven't seen a deer yet. On my 7th hunt for Trump, still haven't seen a deer yet.
Not a single deer.
Not a single deer.
Never mind Trump. Not a single deer.
Right.
Not even a doe.
Not even a doe. And
makes me feel better about my life.
Well, I realized that he was so random. For me just to jump around here, there, even within his range, it's going to be, it's probably always going to be a step behind him or something. So I thought, I just need to keep plugging away at the same location where I know he goes from time to time. And if I just hunt there day after, and usually I don't do that because I don't want to burn the stand out, deer get onto you in a hurry. But with him, I thought, I'll keep plugging away because I know sooner or later he's going to be there. It's just a matter of me being there on the same day, and I don't want to jump around and always be guessing wrong. I'll just keep plugging away until he does show up, and that's kind of how it played out.
So you just stuck to the same stand?
Right. There was actually 2 stands, but one of them I could use any southerly wind, and the other one I could use any westerly wind.
Okay.
They were only a couple hundred yards apart, but with Smokey, I needed a northwest wind, and when we got it, I hunted for him on those 2 days and tagged him. But the other days, I would be out hunting for Trump.
Okay. And the days that you hunted for Trump, you had a particular wind that you were waiting for as well?
Well, the southerly winds worked good. I had probably, 8 or so stands in place for him. For just about any wind direction, there was some place I could go within his range and hunt him.
Okay.
But Smokey was one, I knew I could get, so I wanted to get him as soon as I could. And then I would focus on Trump, and no matter which way the wind blew, one of those 8 or so stands would be good.
Gotcha. So you, again, playing the wind to your benefit so that you could stay downwind of the areas that they were most likely to come from, hoping that they came in your direction that time.
Right.
And which came first, Smokey or the Trump?
Smokey came first.
Smokey came first, and then you focused on Trump. Gotcha. Fascinating.
Yeah. I couldn't have dreamed this season. I mean, to have 2 bucks like this to hunt, I mean, Trump didn't make 200, but he didn't miss it far. He ended up scoring 193.
Yeah.
But to have 2 bucks like that to hunt in the same season was kind of unreal. And then to shoot them both in the same season was kind of unbelievable too. But then to do it on back-to-back hunts and then do it in mid-October, I would have never dreamed that could even possibly happen. And
so you got Smokey on the 15th, is that correct?
Yeah, Smokey on the 15th and Trump on the 19th. They were back-to-back hunts because I didn't hunt the 2 days or the few days in between there.
Right. And was there a reason for that, like wind direction or just?
Well, I shot Smokey on the 15th in the evening, so the 16th I was, taking photos and messing with him and getting him skinned out. And then one evening I took him to the taxidermist and kind of getting my gear back in order. And then
hunter's life stuff.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, right. Wow. Getting
organized to go hit it again. And first evening I do, bingo, there's Trump, the deer I just said 2 days before I actually said I've got a 1% chance of laying eyes on him, let alone killing him.
Right.
Just to lay eyes on him was 1%.
How far was the shot on Trump?
Probably 15 yards.
Wow.
Yep.
Would you say there was a bit of luck involved?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
No doubt about it. I was just lucky to lay eyes on him, let alone get a shot at him.
Right. Wow. Crazy. A crazy series of 5-6 years, just monitoring deer and then finally getting your shot. Do you have plans for next year at this time?
Well, I'm actually working on some things, and I think I mentioned we was talking about trail cameras. I went to Iowa. See, we're only allowed 2 bucks in Illinois, and so I took care of that in the middle of October. I'd been applying for an Iowa tag, and property I got permission to hunt on out there. I decided in early November I was going to go have a look at it just to see what it looks like in November.
Yeah.
Kind of laying the groundwork for next season, and ended up finding an absolute giant in Iowa that I'm going to be after next year. And then I've been monitoring my trail cameras. I've actually been going out and sitting with video camera some of my stands and just watching the deer. And I've got some leads on some local bucks for next year too, but I don't think there's going to be anything to the extent of Smokey and Trump.
Okay. But you're clearly planning next year's hunt now during this year's
absolutely.
Hunt. Okay.
Yep.
Very interesting.
In fact, tomorrow I'm planning on going out and moving some trail cameras. I just got a tip on a local buck the last couple of days, and I want to go out and put some trail cameras in that area, trying to verify, what one guy calls a big buck may not be big to another guy. So
right. Oh, absolutely. Right.
I want to see if this big buck is a 120-inch buck or a 200-inch buck. Who knows?
Right. It's all relative.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Very cool. So, well, let's jump over to the 10 rapid fire questions, Don. I'm going to have Dusty go through the exercise with you, if that's cool.
Okay, that'd be great.
All right, man.
Yeah, Don, I haven't prepped you for these anyway. And number one, what's your all-time best hunting tip?
Play the wind. I guarantee every mature buck plays the wind. It's no different. A buck using the wind is no different than you and I using our eyes. We wouldn't think about getting out of bed in the morning and walking through the day with our eyes closed. And a mature buck is not about to give up the wind. So the wind is key.
One thing, we all have this one thing that we can't hunt without. Anything in particular you cannot go to the woods without?
My bow.
Yeah, other than your bow.
Other than my bow, probably my binoculars, or either binoculars or a video camera. I love videoing deer as much as I do shooting them. So probably the video camera, I guess, if I had to pick one of the two.
Very good. What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
Liberals.
Excellent.
And I can elaborate if you want, but
well, that's another show.
That's different.
Okay.
That's a different show.
Yep.
Not even about deer hunting. Yeah.
Don, how old are you today, Don?
54.
What would the 54-year-old Don tell the 35-year-old Don, knowing what you know today?
Don't sweat the small stuff. Pick your battles wisely.
Very good. You meet a stranger, let's say at a convention or a hotel lobby or elevator. They ask you what you do for a living. What do you say?
I own a food plot seed and deer nutrition company.
Very good. What'd you have for breakfast this morning?
2 donuts.
You get your own billboard on the side of the road. It's a blank canvas. What would it say?
Oh, probably Obama sucks.
Right.
I say the word successful. Who's the first person that pops in your mind and why?
Successful. Donald Trump. He didn't let the liberals stop him from being president.
What's a day in your life look like?
I wake up thinking about deer and how I'm going to kill my next big buck. And then no matter what I'm doing, that's on my mind. And most of the time I'm doing something to make that happen, whether it's trail cameras or research for new hunting areas or scouting, hanging stands. I'm very blessed that I can spend my days from this point forward doing pretty much whatever I want. So it's always got something to do with deer.
Gotcha. Well, the next question is, what's a hunting day look in your life look like? And I think you kind of explained that.
Yeah, it's I never hunt mornings in October. I never hunt mornings in the late season. So if it's a hunting day in October or December, January, it's an afternoon hunt only. During November, I'm in the tree from before daylight as many hours as I can each and every day.
Very good. Well, that wraps up the 10 rapid fire questions. Very good answers.
Very cool. Excellent.
All right. You guys want to talk about politics?
Maybe another day. Another day. That's the 2-hour show we'll have to dedicate to that.
I was just kidding.
Yeah, I know. Don, you've got some stuff going on over at HIGGINSOutdoors.com. Tell us about the website and if people have questions that we didn't answer here today, what are some of the places where we can find you?
Yeah, I've got my own personal website, HIGGINSOutdoors.com. I've got a couple of books I've written that I sell on that website, and I also offer a consulting service. There's a couple of videos there describing that and some more information on that. And then, as I mentioned, I'm one of the co-owners of Real World Wildlife Products. You can go to the Real World Wildlife Products Facebook page or website to learn more there. All
right. Very good. Don, this has been an absolute honor and a pleasure getting to know you and listen to the stories of Smokey and Trump. It's an eye-opener, and it's just nice to hear how other hunters go about strategizing to kill a 200-inch deer or close to the 200-inch deer, the mature bucks, the 7.5-year-olds, the 6.5-year-olds, how they go about it in your part of the world. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I hope to get to meet you guys in person someday. So if you ever see me at a show or something, make sure you introduce yourselves.
Guaranteed. We will definitely make that happen.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, thanks to Don Higgins for joining us on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. I certainly enjoyed understanding and listening to Don tell us how you go about killing 400 inches in 1 week. And as I think you've now realized, it didn't take just 1 week to do it. It took 12 years collectively if you add in the years that it took to hunt both of those bucks and monitor them and try to figure out how the heck it was going to happen. And if you'd like some more information about Don, I know he mentioned it, but HIGGINSOutdoors.com. It's a really good site. There's information on consulting, tree planting, his seminars, access to his books, a lot of good articles on his blog. And he's pretty open and honest and isn't shy about sharing his opinions, as you might have noticed a little bit in the ending segments of the show. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week?
Yeah, Jay, we do. And
the Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
We're going to get into a little bit about a scenario that, over the multi years of being out there, I've just picked up on this, and it's kind of simple, but yet it's to the point. And, there's going to be some that may disagree or agree. But, here in the Midwest, we're hunting a lot of fields, and obviously we have crops, soybeans, corn, and opportunities for food plots. So with that being said, a lot of these young bucks are going to come out and they're going to be in these fields, these crop fields, and the does are going to be in these crop fields, and you're really going to see a lot of deer activity in the fields. Now, let's say you got standing corn and maybe the farmer left you an acre up and you paid for it or whatever, and you're in there and you're hunting the standing corn, and you got, all these young bucks and does are all kind of congregating out in the open. And you're focused on that because that's a natural mental stage, just to focus where the deer are. But in reality, that back trail where the mature bucks are exiting or entering that food source, let's say it's standing corn or a soybean field, if you're focused on where everybody's hanging out, that's probably not where you want to be. You want to be on that back trail. And what I mean by that is you catch an area where the deer is either exiting or entering on the back side of this piece where they're feeding, and the mature bucks will skirt back in and out of there, and sometimes it's overlooked because you just think it's a trail that everybody's using. Well, in reality, the mature buck's coming on the back trail, and he's going there and he's eating, and maybe it's on a little bit of a knoll you can't see on the backside. Well, he'll come in there, he'll graze around, eat on that knoll, check things out, see if there's a hot doe in the area, and he'll slide back out, and you'll never see him. So keep that in mind when you go in and set up on a spot. Just because all the deer are congregating to one area doesn't mean that's where you want to hunt. You need to focus on where that mature buck's taking a back trail and sliding in and out of there without you knowing it. So keep that in mind when you hunt mature bucks. They're going to do the unthinkable, and they're going to not follow the young bucks and the does. They're going to come in there on the sneak. They're going to be real sneaky about it. They're going to get in there. They're going to check things out. They're going to feed, and they're going to get out of there. And if you focus on that back trail or the backside of that feed plot, somewhere maybe you can't get a visual from where you're at now, get back there and check that out. I guarantee your success rate will go up by at least 30% by hunting that back trail.
And that, my friends, is the truth. Great tip, Dusty. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, Dusty at BigBuckRegistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter at Chasing Antler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and Blueberry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.